Paul had what has come to be known as a mystical experience. Mystical experiences are ones like where you have a vision. In Paul's case, it was a vision of Jesus. It was a vision of light. And folks who have had this kind of mystical experience are ones for whom they're not dreaming, but they have these kind of encounters that seem to be outside their ordinary reality. And people who I know who have had these kind of experiences are just like us. Normal, rational human beings, but something has penetrated their ordinary veil of experience in a very different kind of way. And Paul went on in his relationship with Jesus to experience other kind of mystical happenings. Paul was someone who spoke in tongues. Tongues is a way of speaking where it's undiscernible to others who are listening. Sometimes it's described as a prayer language where a person begins to speak in an unknown tongue that only God knows what they're praying. Or sometimes the gift of tongues is you're in a situation and all of a sudden you're able to understand foreign languages that you have never studied. Those are phenomenons that have been proven, checked out. But I imagine for most of us, there can be a real problem with Paul and other folks who have those kind of experiences because we don't have them. And so it can be known as the Paul problem for a lot of folks, that those mystical experiences are outside our own personal experience. And so one of the ways we might respond to that is, and as people have over the centuries, is that those encounters tended to happen just in the Bible. That's where they took place, and not now. Now, one of the helpful concepts for me comes out of Celtic spirituality. And Debbie had last week on the front of the messenger a Celtic cross, and some of you traced your finger on the cross as a way of prayer and seeing how tracing with your finger would lead you to pray to different situations and different people. Another part of Celtic spirituality that comes out of Ireland was the experience that there are some places and some times in our life where there seems to be thin air. That we're in a place or we have a time where the air separating us from God seems to be thinner and we feel closer to God. Not in a visionary sense, but that we feel closer. And I know for many of you, just entering the sanctuary here is a time of thin air. You know, I get to enter the sanctuary most every day. I come galloping up the stairs, and the south window often is lit like this, and I say, "Good morning, Jesus." And it's my way of recognizing the thin air in the presence of Christ that is near. And sometimes it's not necessarily a place, but a moment when we have the experience of that thin air. In one of Marty's teaching assignments a while ago, she was in the teacher's lunchroom where a lot of interesting conversations take place. And there was a conversation about some of the students who were not using all of their abilities in school. Those that weren't studying, weren't showing up very often, not applying themselves. And a man named Bill spoke up, who said, "You know, I was one of them. When I went through high school, I missed a lot of classes. I didn't do homework. My grade point average was a little bit over a D, not quite a C, a D. I was one of those that I think graduated because the teachers got together and talked about who do we not want to have come back. Yeah. And he said about 5 years after graduation, I was dating this girl that was a Christian, and I was starting to experiment with talking with God. And I was walking my dog past the high school. And as I walked by, all of a sudden I was overcome with a sense of painful regret for wasting all those years and opportunities. I had done not much with my life since then. And in that overcoming of regret and the tears that flowed as he walked the dog, his life took on a different course, started going to college, and ended up graduating with a 3.6 GPA. And his life was on a different course. That was a moment of thin air when a new reality broke through and touched his heart and opened his eyes in ways that he could now see. Not a mystical experience like Paul, although you might use some of the same language, but an ordinary experience that many of us can relate to. Thursday morning, when folks were coming to the fellowship hall from the Argyle building, the pain was very raw, and the horror of having lived through a fire. There was one young man that came in bare feet. He had been standing outside for 2 hours in his bare feet. He said, "I can't feel them anymore." And so when he came into fellowship hall, the only thing I could find were a couple knit hats in the giveaway box down by fellowship hall, and he wore those for the next 4 hours. There was a lady there who's had 3 children, each of which she gave up for adoption. And her only contact that she had with those children was a picture of each one of them. And those were burned up in the fire. And another young man who had saved all year long through having more taxes taken out of his paycheck. And the day before, he had gotten his tax refund and converted it to cash and left thousands of dollars behind in his apartment, now gone. And so in the midst of that kind of grief and agony, there was another young man who seemed to have some peace and some serenity. He had been on the top floor. He had been one of the ones who had inhaled the most smoke and working his way down through the smoke to safety. And we asked him about it. What's been your experience of the fire? He said, well, it was horrifying, and we all worked pretty hard to make sure we got everybody out. But he said, I'm a follower of Jesus. And I've lived in the Argyle for 8 years. And I've been thinking for a long time I'm in a rut that I need to get out of. And he said, today, God has made it obvious now's the time to get out of the ruts that have derailed my life. A moment of thin air. That to be a follower of Jesus, we don't need the kind of conversion experience that Paul had. Some of you have had that. It's a real blessing. But for many of us, it's those occasions of thin air that come, of insight, of those moments that lead to a little different life direction. Maybe the right person coming alongside us at the right moment. But another one of the Paul problems is to think of our journey with Christ as being as clear of an experience as what Paul had, or even that it's been as clear as thin air. That for some of us, the experience of following Jesus is more walking down a path that may not seem to have a direct clarity to where it's taking us. That we've had no real calling for our lives, what we're supposed to do. But we are trusting Jesus in the midst of the lack of clarity. And for me, when Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he or she who follows me will find life abundantly. For me, that's an invitation for those of us who may not have a clear call, a clear direction. But the way and the truth and the life that Jesus talks about is available to all people. And for me, I would summarize it up as Jesus did. When we're on the life journey, if we're loving God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, if we're loving our neighbor, and if we're loving ourselves, that's all the clarity that is needed. It may not be a call to a particular vocation or a leading to be at a particular place at a particular time. It may not be a radical experience of forgiveness and a new kind of life. It may simply be, if I love God, and I love others, and I love myself, when I look back at this journey, it's going to be one that was the way, the truth, and the life. I give thanks for that. John Buchanan, who for the last couple of decades has been the pastor of Fourth Presbyterian up in Chicago. It's right across from Water Tower Place. Ed Heminger used to go there when he'd go to convention up in Chicago, and he'd always bring back a bulletin for me. The bulletin was always very humbling. They're a large church doing a lot of wonderful, amazing things. But John Buchanan, when he retired at the end of last month, was 70 years old. And he said, as he was approaching retirement, a lot of people were asking, what was your call like into the ministry? What kind of clear-cut experience did you have that you knew you were being called, chosen to go into the ministry? And John said, well, actually, I didn't have one. They go, oh, are you authentic then? Yeah, but my journey was, when we were asked in the Presbyterian church, when I came into the ministry, the question was, as far as you know in your heart, are you being called into the ministry? And he said, As far as I could see in my heart, I was. There wasn't anything real clear cut. But he says, looking back over 50 years, God has put me in a lot of good places to do a lot of good. Just loving God, loving others, loving myself. This morning, as we sing, Here I Am, I'd like to offer a non-manipulative altar call. As we've moved through the unbinding classes and done a word association with the word evangelism, I'd say most of us are allergic to that word. We tend to think in terms of manipulation, of pressure. But as we sing, Here I Am, I invite you to offer who you are. God has made each one of us very unique. We respond in different ways to God. And so this morning, if you're most comfortable just sitting in the pew saying, Here I am, Lord, please do so. If you're someone like me who time to time likes to remind myself, I'm in this whole hog following Jesus, I like an occasional time when I can come and kneel at an altar rail, laying my whole self there. But I also love the moments when I just sit and offer myself to God again. So wherever you are, whatever you need, whatever your weaknesses are, whatever your gifts are, as we sing together, Here I Am, may you simply offer yourself. Because God will relate to you as no one else. And that is enough. That is enough. Let us pray.